I don't know about you, but I was pretty captivated by the Pope Francis's visit to the United States in 2015. I found myself watching hours and hours of it on TV. I was amazed at the crowds and the stories of how much effort some of those people made to be able to be present, to watch for hours and wait just for a glimpse of Pope Francis. You could see not only how big the crowds were, but people were up in balconies, they were up in parking lots, they were up in trees, they were up in ledges. They had gone to so much effort just for a glimpse of the Pope going by. And as I watched that, I remember thinking to myself, hey, that's just like the story of Zacchaeus, a crowd he couldn't see, and he made great effort to go out and just get a glimpse of Jesus going by. The passage this morning is only found in Luke, and it's a story about a short man at a parade, unable to see the main event, which is Jesus. The story tells us he runs ahead and climbs in a tree so he can get a better view. To start with, we have to give Zacchaeus a lot of credit, because it was very dangerous for him to do this. It wasn't dangerous to climb in the tree. It was dangerous to be in the crowd, because as we learn from the scripture, he was not only a tax collector, he was a chief tax collector. And in that culture, tax collectors were despised, and they were considered sinners, and they were not well liked. Zacchaeus took a big risk. He could have been humiliated, he could have been embarrassed, he could have even got hurt. And yet, he was willing to take that risk because he so wanted to see Jesus. Now, you might wonder what Zacchaeus knew about Jesus that made him take this risk. Perhaps he had heard that Jesus was someone who spent time with tax collectors. Perhaps he knew that Jesus spent time with all kinds of people that were marginalized and considered sinners. Jesus is known throughout the Gospels to hang out with sinners and with marginalized people. So maybe Zacchaeus knew that. So as the story tells us, when Jesus walks by and sees Zacchaeus, Jesus does something amazing. He invites himself into Zacchaeus' home. Zacchaeus, hurry down, for I must stay with you at your house today. What an extravagant act of love. And note that Zacchaeus had done nothing to get Jesus' attention. There are other places in the Bible where when Jesus is walking by, people are shouting out. But this story does not tell us that. What a wonderful act of love for Jesus to choose him out of this crowd. And Zacchaeus' response is to welcome Jesus and declare that he will give half his money to the poor, and he will repay anyone he has defrauded 4 times. So there are 2 different ways this passage gets translated, and therefore 2 different understandings of Zacchaeus' response. First, let's look at the translation we used this morning from the NRSV. In this translation, Zacchaeus' response to Jesus is a future tense response. He's so overwhelmed, so overjoyed, so amazed and surprised that he seems to have a transformation. And he declares that in the future, he will give half his wealth to the poor and repay those he has defrauded 4 times over. Listen again to verse 8. Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. So Zacchaeus' response is an act of love, and it is a future act of love, what he's going to do. Now, it's important to understand that the crowd that was present that day, the first hearers of this story, would have known how extravagant that response was, because they would have known Jewish law. And they would know that Zacchaeus was far exceeding Jewish law. Zacchaeus is not just obeying Jewish law, he's by making things right. His response exceeds Jewish law. Now, a second way this passage gets translated is in the present tense. Listen to how verse 8 gets translated in 3 other versions of the Bible. And remember, this is occurring right after we hear those people who are present grumbling and complaining because Jesus was with a sinner. The English Standard Version. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it 4-fold." You hear the present tense in that. From the Message. Jesus stood there a little stunned. He stammered apologetically, "Master, I give away half of my income to the poor. And if I'm caught cheating, I pay 4 times the damages." He's already doing it. And from the King James Version. And Zacchaeus stood and said unto the Lord, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give poor. And if I have taken anything from any man by false accusation, I restore him 4-fold." Again, that is present tense. In these 3 translations I just read, Zacchaeus is not making amends for the future. He's really defending himself against these judgments that he is a sinner, and saying that he's always been an upright and fair tax collector, proclaiming that he already does give away half and repay 4 times over. He has always been exceeding the Jewish law in this matter. So if these translations are accurate, the crowds may be unfairly judging Zacchaeus and unfairly criticizing Jesus for spending time with him. And whether Jesus has always been a generous tax collector or whether he plans to become a generous tax collector, both are acts of extravagant love in response to Jesus' extravagant love. Either way, it exceeds the expectations. And it's interesting to note how vastly different Zacchaeus' response is from the story of the rich ruler that we find 1 chapter earlier in Luke, in chapter 18. In that story, we have a man who we are told is rich, and he comes to Jesus to justify himself and tells Jesus what a good, law-abiding man he is. He tells Jesus he follows all the commandments that Jesus mentions. He does not commit adultery. He does not murder or steal or bear false witness, and he honors his parents. When Jesus tells him he lacks one thing, that he should sell what he has and become a follower, he goes away sad because he's rich. So we have looked at what extravagant love looks like in this biblical story. So what might that look like in our lives? And by the way, I looked up extravagant in the dictionary, or actually online, dictionary.com. And for the purpose of this sermon, the way that I am using extravagant is to exceed expectations, to go beyond what the minimal or the standard or the status quo would be. So what does extravagant look like? Extravagant love look like for us? Well, almost any time I see or hear the words breaking news. I also, and it's related to another time in our community, or in our country, or in our world where we are suffering yet another tragedy. It is usually followed by extravagant love. When our country was attacked on 9/11, we saw first responders rushing into the Twin Towers. When wildfires are spreading, we watch firefighters put out the fires and try to save the homes of strangers while their own home burns to the ground. When communities are hit with natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, on the TV we watch ordinary people do extraordinary things. Ordinary people taking risks for strangers. There was a wonderful story a few years ago about an organ transplant. There was a person who needed a kidney transplant, and his family would have given the kidney, but they weren't a good match. So they had to rely on the gift of a stranger. And a stranger came forward who was a match and donated a kidney. And somehow, then, the family of the recipient thought, well, then I'll give a kidney out to some other stranger as sort of a pay-it-forward gesture. And then it kind of spread among people, and all of a sudden, strangers were donating kidneys to other strangers since they weren't matches for their own loved ones. I actually was able to find this story online again, and according to the story, they can account for up to 30 kidney donations that started from this one generous act. Now, a quick disclaimer. I'm not suggesting that anyone go donate a kidney or give all your wealth to the poor. I'm inviting you to realize the extravagant love that is around us and is available to us. Jesus is always inviting us to a life of transformation. The Good Samaritan story is a good example of a man who gives himself away. He doesn't take a risk of his life. He doesn't give away everything. But he exceeds the law. He exceeds the law and takes time to simply help a man who was left beaten up by the side of the road. That's extravagant love. Just taking time to exceed the expectations. It's easy to listen to the news today and become discouraged, depressed, and fearful. But I invite you to open your eyes and to look for the goodness that surrounds us. And one final point that I don't want you to miss. In the last verse of this story, Jesus says, "For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." You see, in this story, God is sending Jesus to seek us out. And the term lost in this passage is not to be understood as a doomed or lost soul. It's something that is simply out of place and needs to be found and put back in its proper place, like the lost coin, or maybe our lost car keys. The word saved in the Bible can also usually be translated healed, made well, or made whole. So this last sentence could be saying, Jesus went to seek us out and help us get back in our proper place and to heal us or make us whole. So this passage tells us about a God of extravagant love, one who does not give up on us, but comes looking for us. It's the story of a God who invites God's self into our home to restore us and heal us. And when we experience this, it cannot help but transform our lives. This is the story of a short man in a tree, and it's one of many, many in the Bible that invites us into God's extravagant care. The question becomes, what will our response be to the extravagant love? Amen.